Hello and welcome to Unparliamentary Language, a podcast that has 974,000 listeners every fortnight. And how are you, Rob?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm keeping on. Lots of learning and things to keep up with a new job, which, despite being weird in the current circumstances, has been quite a good way to break up the monotony. I definitely don't lack for things to do. And of course, being me, not only have I started that and I'm busy with all my normal life on the internet and I'm busy recording these podcasts, but also I launched another podcast. So if you want to listen to me reading out public domain books, check out audio-folio.com, where you will find the first 7 chapters of Journey to the Interior of the Earth, which is the better translation of Jules Verne's classic Journey to the Centre of the Earth. Which, I've been reading and will continue to read throughout the next month and a bit.
That sounds awesome. That's another way for our listeners to hear your dulcet tones.
Well, yes, I hope people enjoy it. The people I've been sharing bits here and there with seem to enjoy it, so hope if you like the sound of my voice and you like famous sci-fi stories, hopefully this works for you. I haven't got an advert for it yet. I'm just saying this up front that I've just launched it today, so...
Well, I look forward to listening to it. I need something to help me get to sleep tonight, so that'd be nice to listen to.
Yeah, our the guy who's done all of our nice new updated artwork. I sent him a preview of the first chapter, and then he jokingly sent back that he and his girlfriend had fallen asleep to it that night. So,
hey, sometimes it's not bad to have a calming, relaxing, if somewhat soporific voice. It's during these times you just need something to chill out to, and it's probably the perfect remedy for that.
I mean, what are headlines anymore? Everything is now the main story, and the main story is coronavirus, I'm afraid. So if you were expecting anything different, apologies. Brexit just disappeared. It's been replaced by this. So I suppose we should just kind of go over the last 2 weeks. So I think maybe the most important story that we kind of left you on a cliffhanger. I'm sure people have been able to go onto the BBC News website to get updates, but when we last left you, we had the information come in live on the show that Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, had unfortunately been taken to hospital with the coronavirus.
It kind of shocked everyone, that news, and I think it put it in perspective how if you didn't think it was serious, then it certainly is serious now, that it could affect a man in his mid-50s, who everybody else, I think we'd had Prince Charles had also been affected with it, and he kind of shrugged it off, and people went, "Oh, it's a big fuss over nothing." But yeah, with Boris Johnson having to be, he was first taken into hospital and then into intensive care, it sounded like it was touch and go there for a second on his, he left hospital and did a very moving speech in which he praised the 2 nurses who'd stayed by his side, a Jenny from New Zealand and a Lewis from Portugal, which I thought was, a great gesture by him. Also showed the way that, immigrants and those people who are not born in our country are so important to the running and functioning of our NHS, which seems almost counterintuitive to the messages Boris Johnson's Conservative Party, or maybe the Brexit Party, would have been throwing around in the election only a few months before. So it's nice to see that softer side of Boris, and it's good that he pointed out the work of, people who are immigrants who are, working in the NHS. I thought it was also a bit poignant to point out that one of the big effects of coronavirus, it seems to be affecting BAME citizens disproportionately. There are figures that come in from the 17th of April that reveal of the 13,918 patients that are in hospitals in England who were tested positive for COVID-19 at the time of death. 73.6% were of white ethnicity and 16.2% were of BAME ethnicity. If you compare that to the 2011 census, where you have about 7.5% of the population were Asian, about 3.3% were black, there is this, it seems to show that BME people are affected at a greater, more by corona than white citizens. This is also borne out kind of like, it's more anecdotal, but if you take a very small subset of the victims of COVID-19, that being the frontline health workers, I think we've had about 60 to 70 deaths, and around 50 of those have been from BAME backgrounds. Now, we don't know enough about the virus to see if this is a genetic reason, but I think one of the big things that Corona does do is it shows some of the socio-economic divides that we have in our society, and there are a couple of underlying factors that tend to put these existing inequalities that will be more greatly exposed at time of crisis. So, for example, from a quote from one of the articles I pulled this from, actually, so South Asians live in more deprived areas in general and tend to have more diabetes, kidneys, and cardiovascular disease, all which would be qualified as underlying health conditions, which would put them at a larger risk of having a serious side effect when it comes to COVID-19. Additionally, these workers may be living in, larger multi-generational households, so social isolation isn't that easy. And on top of that, because they make up a lot of key worker jobs, which unfortunately tend to be the lowest paid, because they're frontline, because you've got, doctors and nurses on frontline wards, but also people who are just working, in supermarkets, for example, then all of that combines to see why you're seeing a larger proportion of BMA citizens in intensive care compared to, comparatively wealthier white citizens who have more living space, more, option to work from home, etc., etc. So I think that, I don't know if you've got anything to add on that, but it's amazing how something that affects everybody can really bring up a lot of the other fault lines in our society in that way.
I think, so there's two things I want to mention. One, if you listen to the BBC's coronavirus podcast, their latest episode, as of yesterday, did touch on this, and they had some guests on talking about it. I think there's various issues you mentioned, but one of the things was apparently there was a rumor going around that you were immune to it if you were black on Twitter. And so maybe it's possible that some older people saw that and took that as fact instead of as a rumor, and that may not have helped. But listen to that episode for more information on that, because it's not something I've had a chance to really read up on. And the other thing I'd probably compare it with is the US, where they're seeing very similar trends. And I think we like to think we're not as bad at that kind of social inequality over here than in the US. And we have things like the NHS and other safety nets that aren't present in the US. But I think it kind of tracks, because you can see similar issues happening. And there also seems to be disproportionately affecting people in the south of America as well, which tend to have higher density BAME populations. So I think you can see there's definitely something tracking here, and it tends to be that these people have been, are less well off economically, as you say, and they've been often tend to live, more people together, or in those kind of communities where people are more likely to bump into each other, and all of that is not helpful in this current situation. But yeah, it's mostly showing up all of these issues with inequality. And unfortunately, that's the case as over here as it is in the US. So yeah, if you look over there, you can see comparable numbers.
Yeah, fingers crossed that something like this can help bring this to light and make society more equal. But I guess only time will tell on that matter. Yeah. So Boris mentioned those two workers. He also mentioned how serious this was, and people focused on his quote saying that things could have gone either way. What this did do is that meant that when he'd actually recovered and came out of hospital, he stayed on the sideline away from frontline politics for quite some time. In fact, he only returned yesterday briefly to have a conversation with the Queen and a conversation with President Trump. I don't know in what order. I assume the Queen is more important than President Trump. But it was the first conversation he'd had with the Queen in over 3 weeks. And over that time, we've seen maybe a little bit of a power vacuum within Number 10. Boris is away, and he's left it. It left the country in the hands of Dominic Raab. But there may be some feeling that Raab wasn't possibly willing to take, big decisions at a time when the Prime Minister was, unable to work, but still able, knew that he was coming back at any time. And we've seen a cast of characters appearing on our daily briefings, including Raab, Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, and Priti Patel, who you can thank for our joke at the start. When saying about the number of testing numbers, I think she said she misread a figure and gave a number that doesn't exist. But I was very happy she did for some much needed mirth during this time.
I think we're probably going to come back to this later on because we're kind of doing this chronologically. But today was also the first remote PMQs, which means we had Raab up against Sir Keir Starmer, who we mentioned in our last episode, is now the new leader of the Labour Party. So, yeah, I think we'll touch on that more later. But there's definitely, I'm not sure Raab is someone who inspires me with confidence. I mean, I think Boris did a very good code switch when suddenly he had to be talking about the current situation, the pandemic. But Raab still seems like Raab. And remember, this is the man who once said, I hadn't realised we were quite so reliant on the Dover-Calais crossing. And I don't think we should let him live that down, if I'm honest.
No. That should be... You know how, like, we say the disgraced Liam Fox before
disgraced
everything?
Former Defence Secretary Liam Fox, yeah.
Yes, I reckon that should be the prefix to any time we mention Dominic Raab. Doesn't realise he's quite so reliant on Calais.
So on the topic of Boris, there's been this bit of a power vacuum, but there's also been some discussion about how he initially handled the crisis. Not what we've seen as the public, kind of, the various press conferences, but before things had really started to kick off, that maybe he wasn't taking everything as seriously as he should have done.
Yeah, so what you've seen over time, you've seen in this crisis that a media tone shift. So when we went into lockdown, there is this rally around the flag effect. We're all, one people, we must listen to the government. This is what we do, in quite a united front. But as it's stretched on, and we've seen the implications of what's happened, and we can target our progress against other countries. Some people can say, okay, well, why is the UK tracking the same as Italy or Spain when we had 2 more weeks than them to prepare for this, to happen? Why didn't we act sooner? And so people have had look back, and in particular, they've looked at the month of February as maybe a missed opportunity month. What was happening there? What else could have we done to stop the effects being as large as they have? One of the more attention-grabbing things that appeared in this Sunday Times article, which we'll leave a link for in the show notes, it is behind a paywall, which was the subject of much discussion on Twitter about should something of this important be kept behind a paywall? Should all journalism be free? Blah, blah, blah. So if you look on Twitter yourself, I haven't been able to find the link myself, but I think Owen Jones has got a lot of clips from the article itself that help you get past that paywall. But anyway, one of the big claims from that was that Boris didn't attend 5 COBRA meetings during the month of February, in which the Prime Minister could have taken a decisive stance and taken decisions that, would have led us to be better prepared. This led to Michael Gove going on the Sunday the Sunday news shows after this article was presented, saying, he said to Sky, no, Boris Johnson appeared in every COBRA meeting, before going on the Andrew Marr show later to say that, no, he did actually miss 5. Yeah, so Gove tries to get to Boris's defence, saying that, he did attend those 5 COBRA meetings, and then a later interview with Andrew Marr said, he didn't, but Prime Ministers don't have to. And Gove is right there. If you have a look at the rules of COBRA, there's nothing in there saying that the Prime Minister has to lead them. However, when you compare his response to Prime Ministers of the past, for example, Gordon Brown back in 2007, when there was a foot and mouth crisis, personally chaired the COBRA meetings right at the start. He wasn't just involved or a man on the side. He led. And it's true that all prime ministers have a different leadership style, and maybe that talks to more of Gordon Brown's style of micromanaging than it does Boris Johnson, who seems fairly laissez-faire. But it is a time of extreme national crisis, and something that's had such a big impact on the country, to have a prime minister who couldn't be bothered to turn up, or who was away for a large part of February with his newly pregnant girlfriend, it's a bad look for the prime minister, and doesn't seem like he's taking this crisis on the front foot. So I think when they're talking about the COBRA meetings and him not being there, that's the main criticism led against Boris Johnson. And are we surprised? Did we expect a go-getting? Does Boris come across as a Gordon Brown style leader? No, he's always been a bit more, like I said, laissez-faire. He's always been a bit more lax in that department, but it certainly doesn't help his cause at the moment. I know you had a point to add. What would you like to add?
I mean, this is kind of a random aside, but I thought listeners, especially non-British listeners, might find interesting. As a physicist, I'm a big fan of backronyms. I mean, you only have to look to stuff at CERN to see how many great backronyms physicists can come up with. But I like the fact that COBRA stands for Cabinet Office Briefing Room A, which is just excellent. I just proved they just were like, what should we call this? Oh, well, it turns out if we just name it after the room we hold it in, it's actually quite a cool name.
I wanted... we were so close. If there's a lesser crisis, is it CORB?
COBRA.
COBRA. Yeah, that's a really lame crisis.
And COBRUC for even worse crises, yes. Yeah. They obviously haven't thought through the various levels of crisis. They're like, we only have really bad crises. So yeah,
we can't use the other rooms, guys. It's going to sound ridiculous.
Sorry, that was a complete aside. I just thought it was interesting.
No. A welcome aside. The second issue that's been rumbling on since the start is the issue of PPE, or personal protective equipment, and the availability to NHS staff. One of the other big revelations that came out of this Sunday Times article was that instead of choosing to stockpile PPE for what was likely to be an inevitable pandemic, the UK government decided to ship remaining stock to China to help out with the crisis that was happening over there. This decision, certainly seems odd, and maybe seems a little short-sighted, given, it's with the benefit of hindsight, it certainly does seem like a ridiculous decision now. But questions over why that decision was taken in the short term probably do need to be answered once this crisis is over. In fact, a shipment of PPE that was promised on Sunday was delayed. It was meant to be coming from Turkey. It's been delayed several times. I believe that it was only able to come in today. And there have been various criticisms from NHS bosses and ones that have hit the front pages, essentially saying we don't have appropriate PPE for this crisis. I think one of the big comparisons that's been made is, you could make sandwiches at a local deli in this, but it's not going to actually do anything to protect you. And it's led to some, doctors and nurses saying that they're going into work knowing they're not properly protected, but they've still got to do their job. And particularly when you want to be, one of the big driving factors for this government has to be to protect your frontline NHS workers, because they're the people who are going to get you through this, and they're going to make sure that, you want your intensive care units filled with qualified doctors, not having doctors who are having to go off sick and being out for 14 days every time. So, there's a lot of that criticism coming through as well, and it's been highlighted. They've been one of the, permanent questions that have come up in the daily briefings. Finally, I think the other big factor, it wasn't really touched on in the article, but the only other thing that I can think of that's really been a big issue is testing. There's been a lot of controversy about test sites that were set up at the start that are practically empty and unused. The government is struggling to get the amount of testing kits in they need. I believe at the most recent briefing they said that they would aim for 100,000 tests by the end of this week. But testing is going to be vital for the next stage that we're about to enter in. If lockdown comes to an end, what you will need to do, what's been a successful strategy in places such as South Korea and Germany, is this test trace mentality of you need to make sure that everybody who's going out into the workplace is tested. Those who are positive, you then trace back to where they are and isolate those people, and then you can keep your curve much flatter and much smaller. If you're not testing people, the big problem we've got at the moment is if we end lockdown, we don't know what percentage of the population has been infected. If it's 5%, then coming out of it will be, it won't be very good, because you won't have, 95% of people won't have had any form of immunity to it. If it's 50%, then hey, we're starting to get to a slightly better scenario.
One thing I've posted related to that that I'll throw in the show notes. The Financial Times have done an estimate. So, what is an important number to track is interesting. So all of the official statistics that are being released are due to deaths in hospitals that are directly linked. And so that means someone has to have been in hospital and then been tested. Now, obviously, they're trying to test everyone in hospital, but if there's a shortage of tests, then someone might not be tested and they might have to, you're not sure if that person then had it. But the other problem is, of course, there's been an uptick in deaths. So you can see the registered number of deaths in the community that haven't necessarily gone to hospital, and so therefore wouldn't be tracked in the official number that's being put out. So it's an interesting article. Have a look into it, but essentially suggesting that maybe the actual figure is double what the official figures say, because it's all about these community deaths. People who you might normally have thought had died of natural causes, but with a test, you might be able to find out actually it was caused by the virus.
Yeah, that's a big thing. I think that's happening like in most places over the world, across the globe. Official tracking is slightly behind the actual number affected, and there's a big lag on those results. We're even seeing numbers updated in China, aren't we, at the moment, for people saying, "Oh, actually, it's a bit."
I will make a screenshot of this that I can link. I'll link to this. This is a really good visualization website that shows the various curves for all the different countries. And they actually have a button to toggle China, because China was dealing with this so early on. If you click on the average daily deaths one, which is obviously a bit morbid, you can see that China is this grey line that kind of goes down, and it's nearly down to where South Korea is. If you toggle China now, you can see that about day 79, there's this sudden spike as that gets reported. Which I will throw into the show notes.
Oh, cool.
And it's quite stark how suddenly that jumps up to be higher than Iran on a daily basis. China's big, so any number from China will be big and bias things, but given that they were leading everyone to believe that everything was fine, that sudden uptick suggests some problems.
With reporting, at least, if not, control of the disease.
The problem is we're not there on the ground. We can only guess what that means at the moment, I think. But obviously, people are saying, "Oh, well, was the government hiding figures, etc., etc." But yeah, you don't want to suddenly be back to that kind of level if you've told everyone everything's safe, everyone goes back out. So that's why the kind of strategy is being suggested, and I happen to know some people who've been involved in some of these things who mention stuff informally as much as they can, but it does seem like the progress of this, it's going to be more for the long haul than I think people are expecting, and it will probably be a mixture of these measures of lockdown, release, where release is not necessarily back to what we would consider normality. It may be stuff like allowing people back to schools, so the schools are technically open, but again, there's still going to be all these restrictions for more vulnerable people and so on and so forth, because you can I can't remember the name of the psychological effect right now, but there is an effect whereby basically if people keep living under a set of stringent rules, they start to go, I don't really like following these rules. They start to get tired of it, basically. So there's a bit where everyone kind of comes together, like you say, that rally around the flag effect, and we're all kind of like, yes, we'll do this for king and country and all that kind of stuff. But after a while, everyone starts to get a bit tired of it. So there's the idea being that from a psychological point of view, you can take the foot off the pedal a bit of the isolation, allow people out and about, maybe reopen pubs a little bit, something like that, that allows people to kind of be like, oh, things are a bit back to normal. But then you have to pay attention to how the rates are being affected, and then you might have to come back in with more severe lockdown again. So yeah, we just don't know what it's going to be like at this stage, and yeah, it's hard to guess where we'll be in a month's time, etc.
Everybody's in that same boat there. Talking about things that are hard to guess, Brexit.
Oh yes, I think the only headline I've seen about Brexit is basically everyone's saying, oh, well, if we get offered an extension, we're going to ignore it. Even though the idea behind us being offered an extension right now is because coronavirus has somewhat taken over everything.
Yeah, I think it will be odd if the government refuses that extension, because I believe the mood in the country right now is not we're trying to delay, or there's no feeling that to delay Brexit would be to stop it. Before the 2019 election, there was, I think Conservatives could rightly say that, if there is a delay, Labour will use it as an excuse to get a second referendum, or, if you vote, if the Lib Dems get in, they will overturn the decision altogether. There's no party in Parliament that's willing to say that they're going to overturn the referendum result now, or offer us a chance to. So I would say that accepting the extension would be a good idea, particularly as you probably want to have everything economically fine, given the mass. Well, you want to have your economic stability of being in the European Union, be able to trade for a little bit longer whilst your economy tries to recover from the effects of COVID. So there's all that to go on. However, there's another controversy that's sort of happened involving the UK and the EU, which surrounds the issue of PPE. There's been a lot of discussion as if the UK's decision not to join in with a EU scheme to bulk buy a lot of PPE was due to a high-level political decision, which was basically, no, we've left the European Union, we don't want your help, we'll do this alone. Or was it due to sort of administrative errors? We've heard from the government that there were they missed the email was one of the things that they said. And if you have a look at the timeline of events, which maybe you can drop that in the show notes as well, The Guardian has provided a very good timeline of events. It basically brings it through from the 31st of January 2020, where the UK has, by all means, officially left the EU. The EU starts to meet up and says that, we're going to need PPE soon. They don't include the UK in those discussions. And on the 4th of Feb, EU countries share observations on the state of supplies of PPE in a meeting from member states of the World Health Organization. The UK was there. The UK was invited on the 24th of February to join a meeting to this, but no UK representative attended. So the EU launched its first scheme on the 28th of Feb. The UK is not involved. But because of the lack of suitable suppliers on the 12th of March, they relaunched that scheme. The UK is still not involved. The 17th of March, they launch another one. The UK is still not involved. And then on the 19th of March, the UK belatedly takes up an invitation to join the Joint Procurement Agreement Steering Committee, which makes a decision on the mass purchases. But basically, they don't get involved. The reason if they get involved or not is all this, a big subject of debate. And the worry is that, did the UK government take a decision that was based on we'll go it alone because we're the UK, we'll be fine, or even worse, we've left the EU, we don't want anything to do with you, when in fact that could have saved lives. If it could have saved lives, then yeah, sure, why not go for it? I don't think anybody voted to leave the EU so that they couldn't be involved in buying PPE when it was needed at one of the greatest health crises we've known in the past 100 years. It seems bizarre, and this is something that hasn't really gone away. It was discussed at the end of March, and then kind of went away when Boris went into hospital, but now it's coming up again. And I think that, particularly Matt Hancock, and I know a couple of a civil servant said that it was a political decision yesterday, and then 5 hours later immediately withdrew that as a claim, saying that he had misspoken. So who's pulling the strings on that is unknown at the moment, but it shows what a mess. We've always talked about Brexit and the challenges it brings, and maybe sometimes some people were saying that they were willing to take the economic hit, in order to get Brexit done. This is something where I would say it's not worth taking the hit on when it comes down to people's lives. It seems like a bizarre decision to make, particularly if it was
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think it's one of those things where it's not going to be until everything washes out at the other end that we know one way or the other what actually happened. As you say, there's already been someone saying something has been retracted, etc., etc. So I suppose it's a thing we'll find in the fullness of time. But yeah, if that was the decision, it seems awfully short-sighted and foolish. I just want to give a bit of a live news update again. While we've been recording, we have these daily conferences now. Professor Chris Whitty, who's the government's chief medical advisor, has said that essentially some of the disruptive lockdown measures are set to remain in force for the rest of the year. So that kind of answers that question we were asking only about 5 minutes ago. So social distancing kind of measures will likely have to be in effect for the rest of the year. And also they've updated saying that contract tracing system should be in place in a matter of weeks, that system you mentioned. So that's kind of where we are right now. And there's only so much I can say because the news is changing all the time. But I mean, a year is a fairly long time. And I think a lot of people are hoping this will be over and done within a few months. So prepare for the long haul. Maybe do start taking that daily exercise you're supposed to, as opposed to hoping it will blow all over a bit like Christmas after a month. So our next point I think you had was one I alluded to earlier. So Parliament is back, but in a remote social distancing form via Zoom. So how was that going? How were PMQs today with Keir Starmer, which was also over Zoom?
Yeah, it was a bizarre experience, and particularly sort of focusing on Keir for a moment. A lot of leaders of the opposition are valued on their performance in Prime Minister's questions. It's, the only chance they get to scrutinise the government, and, if you're able to do that effectively, really judges if you've got an opposition or not. All the usual things that we'd use for point scoring, such as the noise in the chamber and the jeering that you get, just didn't apply today. And also the subject matter, Keir had to tread a very fine line. As we've said, it's probably this rally round the flag effect. This, when this first broke, the Labour Party said, no, we respect everything that the government is doing. We're behind all these measures. We're not going to oppose them. Now he has to act as a opposition, giving justified criticism to a response, but not appear to undermine any of the, the good things that the government is trying to do to ensure that the virus doesn't spread. So this PMQs was very fact-based. There were a lot of fact and figures, and I think Keir particularly picked up on the element of testing and saying that testing should happen faster, rather than some of the more emotional speeches that we've seen in PMQs before, or one of those where they try to go for a real zinger or a quip to make sure that they, you get that 5-second clip that makes it onto the news.
We mentioned last time that Keir, being a detail-oriented human rights lawyer, as a person, that's the kind of thing that would stand up well, we would expect, against Boris's kind of more, as you say, emotional kind of... But Boris is very good at standing up and talking to a room of people. But the way to take that down in response is to be like, well, you've said this and it's wrong. They're like, and did we see that? I appreciate it wasn't Boris who he was asking questions of today, but did that come across as we expected?
I think in a way, yes, but it is hard because he's up against Rob, who isn't Boris, who is also having to take quite in the same way that Keir couldn't do the same jeering insults that maybe he would do to Boris under normal circumstances, Rob wasn't flinging it back either. There was none of this fire or you can get some real fiery PMQs. If you think to, what was happening when we were in stalemate over Brexit, some of those PMQs were vicious. And some of the debates
were
Corbyn
really... versus Theresa May?
Yeah, and even like Corbyn versus Boris, when we had like the votes of no confidence and zombie parliament, all of that. That was an ill-tempered House of Commons. Now everybody is, the situation demands a much more tempered response from all sides. So I think it is really difficult to judge Keir on, any traditional standards that we usually would do. All I can say is that he came across as competent again, which is all you really need at this time. And his questioning was precise and fact-based, which is all you can really do at the moment. If you want an example of somebody not doing that at the moment, then I'll point you across the pond to President Trump, whose press briefings have been...
Yeah, I think I threw in a link sometime during the week in the chat, which was someone... I think this is someone... I can't tell. I'm not based in the US. I'm not 100% sure if this is correct, but it was a CNN writer has had it, and it's like, angry Trump turns briefing into propaganda session. But I think we'll get to that when we talk about the polls update over in the US about Trump's approval ratings. Before we do that, we will throw in a small advert here for one of the other shows on the network.
Good evening and welcome to the bar. Join Dr. Wilko as he investigates the histories of your favourite spirits and your favourite cocktails while mixing you a drink at the bar. The other bars may be closed, but a podcast bar will always remain open.
So now I think we can move on to our quick polls update. And again, we're focusing on the US. There's not going to be a general election over here for some time, so we're focusing on Trump's approval ratings and how he will fare against Joe Biden, who I think I managed to edit it together okay last week. But between recording and release, Biden became the Democratic nominee because Sanders stepped down. Let's have a look at those polls from 538.com. So the generic ballot, which is just Democrat versus Republican, if you look at that, it only loads like the last week's worth of polls by default, and it's strongly pro-Democrat. The best is a +12, though that's from a dubious quality study, down to grade C or D. But even like the YouGov polls and the other more reliable polls are in the kind of 5 to 8 range. Let's just put it down to like really good pollsters. Even if you go to like A and B pollsters all the way back to December 17th, it's just all looking towards Democrat. So it definitely seems like the response, which may be unprecedented and all of that, doesn't seem to have helped the Republicans at all.
No, not at all. Although bizarrely, Democratic governors are the ones most under attack at the moment, or at least have the most visible protests against them. I don't know if you've seen a lot of these, but these people who are protesting in cars or meeting in thousands to protest lockdown measures. I think it was one of the governors, I can't remember which state, so apologies for this, but she basically did the response of, I know these people want lockdown to end, however, their actions may have actually extended lockdown because you have 1,000 people there who all met up, not wearing any protective gear, and then all went home again. This is exactly the sort of thing that we are trying to prevent. So, yeah, it's bizarre, given that Trump also tweeted like a series of 3 tweets saying, liberate 3 particular states, all run by Democratic governors, in what was a kind of a weird undermining of, he's at a federal level, he's telling everybody to lock down, and then at a state-by-state level, he's saying, but you should definitely protest these 3 Democratic governors for locking you down. It's bizarre.
So, I mean, we're a bit late to the story on this one, but that was covered, I think, by John Oliver very extensively on the latest episode of Last Week Tonight. And, I mean, yeah, it's so bizarre. That's like if Boris Johnson turned around and said, we've got all this lockdown in place, but you should go and charge around Surrey making an annoyance or something. It's so weird. I mean, I know we don't have the same... I suppose maybe a better... I pick Surrey because I live in Surrey. It's easy to think of, but maybe a better thing is like if he said, Scotland, go out and about, even though everyone else is in lockdown, would probably be better. But still,
or like
it makes no sense.
Manchester or London, like a Labour heartland, somewhere like that. Go out in the streets of Liverpool and protest it. You're going into areas that have always voted Democrat, whatever, always voted that, and trying to undermine their authority when you're saying exactly the same thing. It's weird.
Very strange.
One comment is just it's from a Facebook post I saw earlier, so it's like a very glib comment, but the people who seem to be protesting are those ones who are all in like the combat vests. They look like preppers. All these people who seem to be prepared for the nuclear apocalypse go mad if they can't go to the Cheesecake Factory. And it just, Yeah.
Yes, no, I've seen a post along those lines. Yes, it's like I can survive for years like this. Picture of small room, and it's like day 4 of quarantine. I need to get a haircut. I'm sure people will have seen many memes going around. But so coming out of that, then we come over to Donald Trump's popularity as a president, separate from how people are, what party they're indicating they may vote for. And I think the story we've generally told, except for at the very start, is that Trump has generally had a higher disapproval rating than approval rating, and it's generally been over 50% disapproval. Although, to be fair to him, that's not necessarily unusual for presidents. I think, like, for a fair period of Obama's term, he was actually had a higher disapproval rating than we would expect based on what we see in the media. All that being said, Trump has been consistently over 50% disapproval rating since February 2017. He's been consistently up there. And then, end of March, he started doing stuff to do the pandemic, and he briefly dips down to 49.7% disapproval. There's a little blip at the end of the graph before jumping back up to what I think is slightly below average for him, but 52.3% disapproval at the moment. And only 43% of people approving. So, yeah, I mean, he's kind of returned to normality, and I think that's probably because people, probably an effect of that rally around the flag effect. As you say, Trump brought in some measures. There was talk of, suddenly giving out unemployment benefits and things like that. And then a few weeks later, here we are, and things are not working as well as they should. There's been all these problems with the unemployment system over in the US because it's been overwhelmed. Again, look at John Oliver's video of that clip. I think it was from NBC News. Don't quote me on which news channel it was from, but this woman who just kept ringing up trying to get her unemployment benefit and couldn't get through because the system was absolutely swamped. So I think the reality is kind of biting Trump here, and things are back to normal from Trump's approval rating point of view.
And the way he's handling it is he's playing the blame game. It's everybody else's fault apart from his, isn't it? It's China's fault. It's the WHO's fault. He said that he would, stop funding the World Health Organization, which seems a bizarre decision in a time where you would need them most to withhold funding. And the US makes up quite a large proportion of their actual funding budget. I think Bill Gates was one of the more prominent people to come out against that decision.
Bill Gates, a side fact there, I believe Bill Gates is the 4th biggest contributor to the World Health Organization. So it's like the US, I think it's like the US, China, someone else, and him, proving that Bill Gates' wealth is equivalent to a country. I mean, it's being used for good, don't get me wrong, but that's kind of amazing.
Yeah, no, I will say, on like a Bill Gates side note, I guess, he seems to be, a lot of people have questioned the action of billionaires during this time, like Jeff Bezos, what he's doing, what's he doing? He's just keeping Amazon running and nothing else. Bill Gates has always been a big contributor to health projects. I know that he was, doing lots of anti-malaria stuff before all of this happened. And when it came to getting a vaccine for COVID-19, I know that Bill Gates was quoted as saying, we need 4 factories and there'll be 4 solutions, and it's likely that 3 of those won't be viable by the time that they get to that stage. But we don't have the time to wait and see which one's viable and then build a factory, so we'll just build 4 factories now and then shut them down. It's like that action of, you can't just throw money at this problem to make it go away, but money sure as hell helps a lot. And to have someone like Bill Gates making actions like that to try and make the process as smooth as possible, he's doing a lot of good stuff. But back to Trump. Essentially, his approval rating dip and then spike. I think I heard Nate Silver saying it was one of the shortest rally around the flag effects he'd ever seen in presidential.
It's about really, a week.
he had some good feeling there, or people thought about it, and then he's been able to turn that on its head. And I think it's the daily press conferences, the daily things from him, don't seem to help.
They don't inspire confidence from what I've seen. And as you say, they're attacking the World Health Organization and things like that. Twitter sends me a notification every time the White House is live, apparently, which I don't get for the BBC. So I probably follow the UK ones maybe every 2 days. But the kind of it's Trumpian grandstanding. He's kind of almost turning them into his own rallies. But the problem is that everyone's seeing them, not just the people who agree with him.
Yeah, and his latest one, I think, was to say that, an immigration bill that came in, just saying, we're going to stop all immigration for... We've had a bit more detail on that for 60 days, and that will affect people who are applying for citizenship at this time. He's playing all the greatest hits now, isn't he, of the Trump campaign? I'll go after immigrants, even though in reality it has very little to do with the current crisis. I mean, borders tend to be closed at the moment anyway, or largely. Freedom of movement is stopped in the EU temporarily, but when Trump does it, it seems to have a bit more of a bite about it, and he's playing the old the same political tune, trying to speak to his base. Damn the consequences for the rest of everyone. So yeah, a disturbing scene over in America, but I think it's one of the things that's keeping me going. Like, as much as you can criticize the UK's response in some ways, you can have a look over at the USA and Brazil and think, well, at least we're not those guys. Brazil is another matter. I don't know if John Oliver or anybody has touched on what's happening in Brazil with their president.
I'd heard some stuff, but I must say I haven't really been following it. If you want to fill us in here, we can leave it in here, that's fine.
Yeah, like super short. He's a Trump-esque character. Bolsonaro, yeah. Bolsonaro is him, and he's been quoted as saying that it's just the sniffles, it's a minor flu, it'll go away. And he essentially refused to put the country into lockdown, saying that Brazil has a climate and a young population, will be fine. And the complete lack of action and his frequent undermining of health officials trying to give advice mean that they think Brazil might be one of the countries that comes out of this the worst, or with one of the biggest spikes. Even though reporting over there is maybe less accurate than we would expect, or because of just the development of the country, it's harder to track those things in Brazil. Its curve is certainly seeing the effects of having no action taken. So scary times for those in Brazil. And then you've got America, which is also one of the biggest affected country in the world now, with somebody at its helm who doesn't seem to be handling it very well. I can't remember if I said this last time, but the one consolation I have is that he must be miserable right now, Trump. He's having to do work every day.
Yeah. Before we head on into our outro, I'm not sure if this will stay in here. It could maybe be a Patreon bonus thing, or I will just cut it out and release it as a bonus thing. I don't know. Or maybe I'll just leave this in. But I thought maybe given that we're talking about a lot of depressing topics right now, I know we've tried to add a little bit of levity here and there, but I wondered if you had any recommendations. What is it you're watching in lockdown that is taking your mind off things?
It's not new to anybody, probably, but I've just discovered it. It's on the BBC iPlayer. Have you seen any of This Country? Which is...
No, I haven't actually.
A comedy set in the Cotswolds following two younger people, Kerry and Curtin, and what life is like for them in a deprived Cotswold village. It's hilarious. It's heartbreaking in places. And it just reminds me of, particularly because it's all West Country accents and stuff, I know kids who I went to school who are like that, who are probably living the same lives as that. And it's very, very funny. If you get a chance, give it a go. I believe it is at least BAFTA award-winning comedy. It's no Mrs. Brown's Boys.
Oh, I've not heard of that, but I'll definitely have to check it out, because I think comedy is a thing I've been turning to. Not quite, definitely not comedy, but another thing which I'm sure you haven't been able to live on the internet without hearing about. And I suppose my recommendations are more Netflixy, because I'm assuming more people have access to that than the BBC, because I know we have listeners who are outside of the UK. So firstly, Tiger King, it is...
Okay, my comment on this is that everybody has a go at Carol Baskin, and yeah, she's weird, and maybe she killed her husband, but the worst person on that is Doc Antle. Doc Antle is a scumbag.
Oh, yeah, he's definitely... Yeah, it's definitely it's a really interesting documentary in that over 7 episodes you're introduced to several characters who are out there and weird, and it's very kind of Florida Man.
They're all horrible people. How do they get
that's the thing. Like, they build everyone up a bit, and they're like, oh, well, this person is, famous for this, or that they've been on this TV show, and you're like, oh, okay, and they've helped out with filming stuff in his specific case, and then like the next episode, the rug is pulled out from under you because it's like, and this person's awful because of this, and there's all these accusations about this, and it's just a well constructed documentary, and the fact that the topic matter is somehow real. It's a fascinating watch, and it's only like 6 hours, I think, total. So obviously, I think everyone is suggesting that right now, but I finally watched it and I enjoyed it. Something you reminded me of, having talked about Bill Gates earlier, there's a documentary which I'll link called Inside Bill's Brain, which is from 2019, but basically they're hanging out with Bill Gates and you see how he makes decisions. And it's one of those things where it's really interesting given the current situation, because this is a person with a lot of money who is trying to help. But he has to make those hard decisions because if he just gave away a small portion of his money to everyone in the world, sure, everyone in the world would be a small bit richer. But it's like, well, how do I focus this on research? And, where he puts his money is important because it's funding all these different initiatives. And it's kind of about his decision-making process and stuff like that. It's obviously not specifically related to the current pandemic, but it's just kind of a fascinating thing, especially for someone who, in the mid-90s, everyone was like, oh, well, Bill Gates, he's the man behind that evil paperclip, he's really rich. Like, he was maybe he wasn't the Jeff Bezos of his time, but I think people would have probably said stuff about Bill Gates like that then, and I think he spent a lot of his later years doing very good work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, so it's interesting to watch how someone like that works.
Yeah, definitely.
And if you don't have a Netflix subscription or don't have access to the BBC, I think there's a load of free stuff available on various websites. I know Amazon via Audible have released a load of free audiobooks. There's a load of free kids' TV available on Prime Video, I think, for streaming now. And if you do have a BBC account, BBC Sounds have released a load of audiobooks for free, including their full cast production of The Testaments, which is the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, which only recently came out. So it's not just like, old period drama kind of stuff. There's modern books that they've done productions of, and you can get for free depending on where you live.
It's not just stuff in the public domain, is it? I guess it's...
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So I think it's a BBC Sounds thing, so you have to have an account, and it's not as open as podcasting, unfortunately, which is my one criticism of BBC Sounds, because there used to be a period where all the BBC stuff was basically free for everyone, and I thought that was great. This is not my time to soapbox about whether BBC stuff should be open and available to everyone, but there's a lot of cool free stuff out there. There's been people giving away free RPGs all over the place. I know that Onyx Path were giving out all of the 20th anniversary versions of World of Darkness. They were doing them like one day after the other, so you will have probably missed out on that. But there's so much free stuff out there at the moment, and so much like stuff like Humble Bundles where you can pay whatever you want, but the proceeds are going to charities helping people directly affected. There's a lot out there, just is what I'm saying, of stuff that is interesting and fun and free, or costs very little, but the proceeds go towards helping people. So if you are starting to go round the bend, stuck at home, then there's a lot of things to distract yourself with, and hopefully take your mind off the situation. As always, Rob, thank you for joining me and lending your insights. It's nice to have a conversation as well. Nice to touch base with your friends and check everyone's okay. So that's good as well. It's been nice having a scheduled call amongst all this. As always, you can find us on our website, parliamentary.observer. You can find us everywhere podcasts are found, and on YouTube and all sorts of other places. If you want to support us financially, patreon.com/TTSS, where there are some Patreon-only posts going up, and they found out about my new podcast a day before anyone else. There's things like that. If that entices you, throw a few dollars our way to support the website and the equipment we need. And as always, the best thing you can do is spread the word about the podcast, tell other people that you like us, why you like us, get them to download and listen to it. Maybe say, oh, there's someone reading Journey to the Centre of the Earth over on this podcast, and send them to Audio Folio. So whatever it is, any support is obviously welcome. But if at the moment you can give money to a more worthy cause than us, I'd also recommend that. We are both currently employed, so I think if you can support charity instead of us, I completely understand and do that. Other than that, I don't think there's anything else to say. Then it's good night from me.
And it's a good night from him.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Join Mike and Tom for nerdy conversation with a multitude of guests on Hat of Many Things.
Say hi, guys.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
I'm Mark, a librarian and professional wrestling ring announcer.
I cast League of Legends.
Soteros Philbrucato, best known for my work with White Wolf and Onyx Path Publishing on the World of Darkness.
Hi, I'm Jason Carl. I'm the producer of V5 at White Wolf.
Yeah, my name is Johanna Pettersson. I'm a Finnish game designer.